Pure Fiction, the latest game mode to be introduced in honkaistarrail, similar to the Memory of Chaos. It is considered to be an endgame content for players. Although there are a few similarities to the Memory of Chaos, the overall gameplay is completely different. First, I would like to explain what is similar to the Memory of Chaos. Pure Fiction also has its own unique buff, whimsicality, which is essentially the memory turbulence from Memory of Chaos. In the current iteration of Pure Fiction, it applies a dot called Shatter on the enemies when an ultimate is used to attack the enemies. It would deal a set amount of damage to the target and its adjacent units when it's the start of their turn, or when it is defeated. It could also stack up to 6 times. Lastly, it also has 2 nodes or stage in Memory of Chaos, where it requires 2 different teams to work together for the final score. However, unlike Memory of Chaos, you only have 5 cycles to play this mode. Once these 5 cycles are up, the battle ends, and the amount of score you obtain through damaging or defeating enemies would be concluded. There are a total of 3 waves per node, and a maximum point of 40,000 allowed for each node. Hence, the maximum score you can achieve in each stage is 80,000. Since it doesn't require you to fully defeat the enemies, it can be considered to be easier in that regard. Moreover, we are allowed to select an additional buff known as Cacophony for each team. For the current Pure Fiction, there are 3 buffs: Erupt, Excitation, and Rupture. All of them have their own respective benefits. Erupt inflicts an additional stack of Shatter upon using an ultimate. Excitation has an 80% chance of applying Shatter stack on enemies when they arrive. And Rupture increases ultimate damage for all allies for the remainder of the battle when enemies with Shatter are defeated. After understanding the buffs and the game mode, I set off to perfectly complete Pure Fiction with the maximum score. Because of the low level, there was no difficulties in scoring a perfect score for the first 3 stages. However, the final stage was where the difficulties arise. It required precise understanding and team compositions to clear it, especially because there was a boss monster that appeared in the 3rd wave. To understand Stage 4, the first wave would be accompanied by an elite along with 12 mob units. The second wave would have 2 warp trotters as well as 12 mob units. As for the last wave, it would be a boss monster accompanied with 24 mob units. To obtain a perfect score of 40,000, all of these enemies must be defeated within the 5 cycles. Moreover, defeating in the boss monster early does not mean it would go down immediately. It would obtain an invincible shield and have its HP set at 1%. But on the flip side, once all 24 mob units were defeated, a vulnerability debuff would be placed on the boss monster, allowing it to be defeated quickly. I first considered the first node. Because the majority of the enemies were weak to physical and or ice damage, I considered what units were the best to clearing this node. For physical, there were 4 units that I considered to have potential in this mode: Argenti, Clara, Sushang, and Physical Trailblazer. Argenti was the unit that stood out to me the most due to it being an Erudition unit that could target multiple enemies per attack. Moreover, it had built-in energy regeneration as well as one of the lowest ultimate energy requirement, making it an ideal unit to use. As for the others, Clara, with her follow-up attacks, was an option. However, her slow speed and follow-up attacks requiring the enemies to attack her may not be optimal. For Su Shang, she does have a bit of action forward and speed buffs that could occur to help with clearing the mobs, but since she is a single target unit, it didn't feel possible to get a perfect clear with her. Lastly, Physical Trailblazer. Physical Trailblazer does have a skill and ultimate that could do blast damage. More importantly, her first Eidolon allows her ultimate to regenerate an additional 10 energy if an enemy was defeated. As for Ice, there are currently only 3 DPS units, which includes Herta, Jingliu, and Yan Qing. Yan Qing was immediately not selected due to it being a single target unit. Even Jingliu wasn't exactly a great option, due to the fact that it required a bit of setup before it could unlock her blast damage. Herta, on the other hand, was an amazing unit due to her follow-up attacks. Her talent could trigger multiple times and decimate the enemies. In the end, I decided to run the team composition using Argenti as the core unit for first node. With this in mind, I decided on what play style I wanted to use him with. I first took a look at the cacophony. With Argenti as the core, I knew that I would want to focus on a team composition where I would spam his ultimate as much as possible to clear the waves. With this in mind, I decided that it was either Erupt or Rupture that could be used. But after thinking it a bit more, I decided to take Rupture. I was afraid that by using Erupt that I might spam the ultimates too much, that I would go above the 6 stacks, which diminishes the value of Erupt. Hence, Rupture seems to be more consistent with this team. In order to allow Argenti to use his ultimates as much as possible, there were only a few options that I could really choose from. Ting Yun, Hua Hua, and Bronya. These units could help with the energy regeneration for Argenti or advance him forward so that he could have his turn quicker. I selected Ting Yun and Hua Hua to join the team. As for Bronya, she was definitely a feasible option, but I was afraid that I might run low on SP if I included her in the team, especially since I was going to use Hua Hua and Ting Yun's skill whenever it was possible. Hence, I opted to run another support unit, Pela, to help increase the damage done. Moreover, Pela's ultimate could also help apply shatter on the enemies. With this, my team was decided for the first node. It was smooth sailing. Argenti would crush my opponent and instantly regenerate around 40 to 50% of his energy bar again, making it quite easy for him to reach his ultimate by taking a few enemy attacks or through Hua Hua or Ting Yun's ultimates. There was no need to even use his second ultimate charge to deal massive damage to Jeopard, the boss monster of the first node, as he was defeated at around the same time as the 24 mob units. For the second node, this is where things got tricky. There were at least one monster that wasn't weak to a certain type each wave. However, the weaknesses were mainly fire and lightning. Wind was also an option that could be chosen. For the fire weakness, the units that captured my attention was Himeko, Guanifan, and Topaz. There was nothing much to say about Himeko. Similar to Herta, her kit works really well in purefiction, with her follow-up attacks that could trigger every time a weakness break occurs, as well as ultimate and skill that could target multiple units. She was an ideal unit to use. Guanifan was also a choice, as she could also target multiple units with her skill and ultimate. However, her damage might be slightly lacking when compared to Himeko. Topaz was an interesting selection, as Numbi would appear in the action order, allowing us to have an additional attacker. Moreover, we can speed up the process in which Numbi attacks to deal more damage. She also buffs follow-up attacks with her skill, so it could be useful if we were to focus on it. As for lightning, it was either Jing Yuan, Kafka, or Serval. Jing Yuan was a good unit to use as he could target all enemies on the field using his skill, ultimate, as well as his talent. However, without the help of Ting Yun, I felt that it didn't have sufficient energy regeneration to pull it off, especially considering that Jing Yuan wasn't the fastest unit. Kafka was an interesting option where she could target multiple enemies with her skill and ultimate. Moreover, she had a bit of energy regeneration whenever the shock dot were to proc. Lastly, Serval. She was somewhat similar to Kafka in terms of their kit, but had a much easier method of regenerating energy. With all of this in mind, I decided to use Himeko as the core of this team. The moment that I decided Himeko was on this team, I knew that I had to include Herta as well. Himeko's follow-up attack followed by Herta's spins was going to be the key in reaching the maximum score. In order to facilitate the weakness break to trigger Himeko's follow-up attacks, Mei was selected to be the third unit as she would increase the weakness break efficiency. In addition, I knew that clearing the mobs was going to be the trickiest part when compared to defeating Svarog. Himeko and Herta was great at clearing the mobs. They were also a great combination in not overhitting the enemies. The extra damage dealt above their HP wasn't going to be passed on to the next mob units that were on the wave. This was also another reason why I preferred using Himeko instead of Jing Yuan, which was one of my favorite units. However, I also knew that there was going to be an issue within the third wave, where they might not be able to activate their follow-up attacks. Moreover, the auxiliary robot arm that Svarog, the boss monster, was weak to neither fire nor ice. As such, I needed a unit that could deal with it. The main issue was that it was unlikely that I could run just any unit because of the way the team was built. I only had one slot left and no sustain units. At this stage, Himeko and Herta could most likely only survive a couple of attacks. Moreover, with both Himeko and Herta on the team, the amount of SP this team was going to use was quite high already. I needed a unit that could help deal with the auxiliary robot arm, sustain, and not use much SP. After considering my options, the only unit that could work was Blade. The auxiliary robot arm was weak to wine. Moreover, Blade would deal blast damage through his enhanced basic attack and ultimate. His follow-up damage would also attack all enemies. Furthermore, he was a unit that uses very little SP. He was also a destruction unit, which meant that the taunt value was inherently higher when compared to the rest of the team, and he possessed the ability to heal himself up using follow-up attacks or his ultimate. Lastly, since I could always reset the node without any drawbacks, as long as I managed the HP properly, there wasn't a problem running a team without a true sustain. With this, I decided on my team. Himeko and Herta did wonders. Their follow-up attacks were crucial to clearing the mobs, and Blade would also help wipe out some of the mobs with his enhanced basic attacks. Although it was quite close, I still managed to clear it within 5 cycles. With all of that said and done, these were my thoughts as I constructed a team that managed to perfectly clear purefiction with the maximum amount of points. Let me know in the comments below if you selected another team or method to reach this achievement. I am curious on what other teams that other players had used to reach the maximum amount of points. Other units that I had considered was C. Lee and Bronya for the action forward. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I'll be showing off my character stats, light cones, traces, and eidolons next. Hope it helps.